So one of the first things that we need to do to make sure that we are studying more efficiently is having a pre-study step in there. So I want you to imagine that we are shooting an arrow. And when we shoot the arrow, it's going to have a certain trajectory. If we were to tap this arrow at the very, very beginning, then the trajectory, even if we tap it only a little bit, would change by a lot, compared to if we were to tap it near the end, where we wouldn't be able to make a very big difference. So you can see that when we make a small change relatively early on in the studying process, it makes a big difference later on. And pre-study is a great example of this, where we do a little thing at the very beginning that makes a really big difference down the line. So I generally say that if the student is not pre-studying, doing the act of pre-study correctly makes such a big difference that it's almost useless to even think about changing anything later down the line, because simply by doing the pre-study, it will have already changed so many other variables that there's going to be no point comparing it. We may as well work on the pre-study first and then change everything else afterwards. So there's a right and a wrong way to pre-study. And in order to make sense of this, we need to understand a little bit more about what we're trying to achieve with the pre-study. So I want you to imagine that your knowledge is like a room, okay, or an entire house. And inside this room, there are various bits of furniture. You might have your desk over here, and then there are drawers in here. You've got a wardrobe on this wall, and then you've got a, maybe, I don't know, like a dressing table on this wall. And so there's various things that are in the room. Now, remember, when we're studying, the purpose is not to simply study. There's no point reading a bunch of books, and there's no point attending every single class if we didn't actually learn it to the point where we can use and apply that knowledge later, right? There's no point learning everything if you can't even put it out in an exam or use it in real life or whatever it is. So the purpose of learning it is so that we are able to apply it. And we can basically say that if we learned something without really being able to apply it, we didn't really actually learn it, or at least that time was completely useless. So in order for us to be able to use the information that we absorb through our study, it needs to be arranged in our mind in a way that we know how to pull on that information. So for example, if I were to tell you some random longitude and latitude coordinates for a random place out there in the world, you would probably not be able to remember that string of numbers, purely because it's random. It doesn't belong anywhere. It doesn't fit anywhere. You don't know how to think about it. You don't know why it's relevant. But equally, a string of numbers that's not so random, like your phone number or your birthday or your address, these are things that you will be able to remember and, in a way, just retain because of the fact that you know that it's more meaningful to you. So you know how to think about it, which allows you to hold on to it better, because your brain knows where that information belongs and what it is related to. So if we think about that, then when information is disorganized to the point where we don't know how to think about it, like a random series of numbers or just random bits of information like the ingredients that you might glance at on the back of a shampoo bottle. Random bits of information like this are kind of like having a room where all the items are just sort of scattered on the ground. Okay? And in order for you to find this information and then use it, so if there's an exam question and it says, hey, tell me about how this thing affects this thing. It takes so long for you to sift through this room to even find it, and then to try to relate that to another item in the room is a very inefficient process. And actually what your brain will do is it will say, this is so useless, I don't see why I need to hold on to this information. It will actually just forget it. So it reduces our retention by a lot. So we don't want this level of very disorganized clutter in our mind. We want clear boxes and categories in which we can arrange the information. And that's basically what furniture does in a room, is that we say, okay, we want to have all of our pencils inside this drawer. We want all of our clothes inside this wardrobe. We want all of our, I don't know, miscellaneous items inside this. And maybe we've got a laundry hamper in the corner where we put all of our, whatever laundry, I guess. So by categorizing information differently, we're able to give it a place to live in our mind, which increases our retention, increases our speed of recall, and ultimately increases the results that we're able to get because we can use the information a lot more freely. Okay, so I'm sure you can imagine this as if your mum were to say, hey, go bring me that sock that had that hole in it, let me try to repair it or something. If you had all of it just in a clothes pile on the floor, you're going to have a really tough time finding that sock. But if you know that all of your socks are in the top left drawer on the left-hand side of the wall, you can just simply go and find it and bring it back. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So really the purpose of pre-study is actually to not learn all the little bits of information that we're going to fill the drawers and the wardrobes with. It's not to learn every single fact. It's not to memorize every equation. It's not to memorize every quote and every character. It's not to memorize a list of literary techniques. It's simply to think about how all that information might be arranged. So we might look at a bunch of different quotes and say, okay, so we've got a bunch of quotes here. So there's going to be, a quotes area. Or we've got a bunch of different equations that are related to electricity or waves. We can put that in a certain place. So we have a bunch of different theories that we can put in from biology that are arranged like this. So we're just trying to think of ways that we can group and categorize that information. And in a way, it doesn't really matter exactly how well you group and categorize it, because those categories will change as you learn more and more. So you don't need to actually get it all right, okay? You just need to try to put it into groups so that you're sort of arranging the information a little bit more so it makes a little bit more sense. And that's what pre-study does. Pre-study is not about learning everything. It's just about giving yourself an idea about where the big groups of information are and how those big groups of information might relate to each other. So it shouldn't take very long. You shouldn't be spending a lot of time reading through and memorizing everything. You can simply go and skim the main headings, look at the diagrams, look at bold words, terminology, learning objectives, just the things that are really, really obvious on that surface level. And just have all of those things, write them down very briefly, read a little bit about them just so that the word has meaning. If you encounter a new piece of terminology and you have no idea what it means, well, it's really hard to think about how that's going to be grouped together if you don't even know what the word means. So we can read a little bit about that word just so that we have an idea about what it actually means. We don't have to memorize it. We don't have to think about it too much more than that, just that surface level. And once we've collected that list of keywords and all the basic kind of things that we might have floating around, and we've got a general idea about what all of those mean, we think about how some of those things might be related and group them together in whatever grouping seems to make sense for us. We could say, okay, all of these things seem like they're kind of more basic theories, and then these seem like they're kind of applications of those theories, or maybe this is sort of talking about literary technique, whereas this is kind of talking about the themes in the text. So however you're wanting to break it out, you can do it however it makes sense to you. And this process of really thinking about how it's arranged is actually a really important part of learning that most students will skip. They often feel like it's a waste of time, or they're not getting into the detail and memorizing it. But that's like someone saying that they think it's a waste of time to put furniture into a room because it's taking time away from throwing items into the room haphazardly in a disorganized way. You can see it doesn't really make sense. It's important to get that basic organization and structure first, because that saves time massively in the long run. So I generally say 1 hour of good pre-study saves 10 hours later down the line at least. So the first thing to do well is pre-study, and we're going to be coming back to this idea again and again, and we're going to be building on this basic technique as we go. So if you haven't already, give pre-study a go and make sure to incorporate it into your study technique before you move on. You want to have a basic level of competency with this very simple first step. Even if you're doing it wrong, that's good information, because remember Kolb's experiential learning cycle. We can take that information, why did we get it wrong, and we can figure out how to make it into something right. If you sort of sit there trying to make it perfect, without actually doing anything to begin with, then we're not ever going to have the amount of data that we need to figure out whether we were able to do something right or wrong. If we spend too long just sort of sitting there trying to get everything perfect, then what happens is that all of those sort of theories of how we should do it in the most perfect way go completely untested without experimentation, and they just become theories in our heads, which is a lot less valuable than getting real world experience to figure out how we can make it better and better. So there's a direct correlation between people that are able to just get on with it and learn from their failures and experiment with things with actually improving and getting that perfect level of success versus people that just think about things in their head for a really long time, and actually that makes things a whole lot worse. In fact, there's even this really famous study that was done where a university class was divided in two, and it was a class on photography, and half the class would be assessed only on the quality of a single photo that they produced by the entire end of semester. And a semester is usually half a year. So imagine having half a year to produce just one perfect photo. The other class, the other half of the class was tested on only the number of photos that they would submit throughout that semester. So half of the class only had to submit a high number, a high volume of photos. The other half of the class was assessed only on the quality of just a single photo. At the end of the semester, which group of students actually ended up producing the highest quality photos, highest quality of photos? Counterintuitively, it's actually the group that didn't care about quality. They're the ones that focus purely on sheer quantity and volume of photos. So the ones that focused on quantity actually ended up producing higher quality photos, because while this group was simply testing theories inside their mind and then producing photos that were ultimately a lot more mediocre than they had thought, the group on the other side were actually testing and experimenting with different theories and getting real experience and getting their hands dirty. So remember, this is a skill that we're learning. There's some trial and error involved. And this type of pre-study, where even just trying to do it right is better than not doing anything, is a great first step for you to just get your hands stuck in there and make it part of your system before we move on and touch on any of the other stuff.